Welcome back to Dater or Excommunicator, relationship advice with the dating expert.
Of course.
I'm your host, Micah Foster, and with me, as always, is the dating expert.
I am here. I am a dating expertise.
Luke Sharping. Now, how many dates have you been on, Luke Sharping?
You know, people ask me this question a lot. They kind of seem to come under the impression that maybe I'm not being completely serious when I say I've been on many dates.
I'm sure.
I'm sure. I'm sure. But, you know, I mean, why would you think I'm not being serious when I say that? Who would lie about how many dates they've been on?
No one. I've never met someone who's done that as well.
Nobody ever does anything like that. So I think it kind of says something about you if you question the amount of dates I've been on, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you are the dating expert today. We're jumping into episode 2. I think we had a pretty successful episode 1.
Very popular.
Very popular. Immensely popular,
We've gotten thousands and thousands of downloads,
if not millions. But in today's show, we're going to talk some dating 101. We kind of jumped the gun a little bit, went straight into the first date in episode 1. Now we're going back to the basics, dating 101.
Yeah, we realized that our listeners, you know, their level isn't quite there to the first date yet.
They're really not. They're
the
not
average
there.
listener, they need dating 101.
They do.
Before, so we got a little ahead of ourselves.
I mean, first dates is like 103. Like like you can kind of take it at a similar time, but it is a different different level.
Yeah,
clearly.
Our listeners need dating 101. We realized, so we decided to go back. Do what dating 101. It's going to be very useful and necessary for all the upcoming episodes.
Exactly.
We're going to refer back to this one a lot. For sure.
So we'll kind of get into the definition of dating. We will be taking a break, as always, to play a little segment in the middle of our show. This week we have a new segment called Is It a Date? And we'll see how it goes. If it doesn't go well, maybe we won't bring it back. If it goes great, we will.
Yep.
And Luke hasn't even played that.
Yeah, I don't know what the question is. I don't even know what the game is, really.
Yeah. And then we'll end out our show with the Bible verse of the day. As always, if we have time, we might get to a little segment we've been working at called Sunday School Snippets.
That'd be fun.
But I don't know if we're going to get there. We got a lot to cover in Dating 101.
Yeah, Dating 101 is really important, so, you know.
Exactly.
Depends how long this takes.
So Sunday School Snippets might have to wait till next week or some other future episode.
But look forward to that. That's going to be fun.
That is going to be fun. So the big kind of question of the day for Dating 101 is, what is your definition of dating? And before I ask the dating expert right away, I want to get your opinion on 3 definitions.
Okay.
So I scoured the internet, not really at all.
Okay.
But I came up with 3 different definitions. So I have my definition that I found in a random Word document from like a year and a half ago.
Nice.
Yeah. So I don't really remember why I wrote this definition, but I think it was about a year ago. It was in like a random Word document of mine. I also have the Wikipedia definition.
Okay.
And then I have. I'm stretching it a little. I'm not putting him on the spot, but it is Joseph Chechi's definition from Will They Won't They.
Yes.
So please go listen to that show if you haven't. But so those are the 3. Which one do you want to start with? And we'll give a kind of a commentary on it, and maybe after those 3, I'll ask you if you have something different, if you want to agree with one of those.
Yeah, let's start with the Wikipedia definition. I think that's going to be the most general, least specific probably. We'll start with that one.
Okay, the Wikipedia definition. Dating is a stage of romantic relationship in which 2 individuals engage in an activity together, most often with the intention of evaluating each other's suitability as a partner in a future intimate relationship. So what do you think about that definition?
I mean, it's not wrong. As I kind of expected, it's very vague.
Mm-hmm. Very, very much so.
Very vague. So, I think, I mean, if you would go off what I would guess would be most people's definition of dating, I think they might agree with that. But I know there's lots of people who consider themselves dating who are definitely well beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
That stage, who are like living together and are definitely more permanent partners than just considering that, and
that's a good
still
point.
Consider themselves dating. Not that I would say that that's a good thing to do. I don't think you should be living together while you're not even married.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I could see why lots of people might find some issue with that. I don't find any major issue. I mean, that's kind of what you're doing. You do things together. You try and get to know a person in order to decide whether you want to have a more permanent relationship. I would say marriage is that more permanent relationship, not just more dating.
Yeah.
So
That's a good point.
A little more specific there, but I think it's an okay definition, if a little too vague, to be very useful.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of interesting things to draw ourselves to. One, in which it says here in which two individuals engage in an activity together, which seems like very specific randomly.
Yeah.
Like the rest of it's very general, but then I guess the definition is implying like a very specific like activity, something happens. I'm not sure. Maybe they're just saying dates.
I think that's referring to a date.
Okay.
I think the activity is they do an activity which is called a date.
Right.
So they go on a date, they go to movies, they go to a restaurant, they go
right
anywhere together, in which to they go on a date. Now, I think, thinking about it from that perspective, I think it is missing a little bit of something from that definition, in the sense that definition kind of shows that all dating is going on a series of dates.
Mm-hmm.
I think dating is more than going on a series of dates. In fact, I think you could probably date someone and go on very few dates.
That's interesting.
I think that going on dates in general, might be a little bit of a hot take. I think it's an overrated way of dating, going on dates.
Ooh. Should we go there right now? I think we go there right now. That's
you want to go there right now?
And we'll get back to the definition thing.
Okay.
But this is something I wanted to ask you anyway. And I had this written down. Is there a difference between dating and going on dates? I think I'm really interested to hear what you're saying about this.
Yeah, I think there is. I think going on dates is a fun thing to do. It's a good way to spend time with that person, and I think there is a place for going on dates while you're dating. I'm not saying it's.
So what's going on dates? I think you gave a couple examples, but do that again.
Yeah, going on dates. So essentially, I would say going on a date is any activity that you do specifically together. What's a good way to say it? Any activity that you do specifically with each other, for the purpose of getting to know each other or having fun together or something like that. I think, and I think that's fine. But I also have some opinions on whether it's absolutely necessary all the time.
Yeah, well, go ahead. Why would it not be necessary? Because I think in our culture, maybe that's not everyone's idea of dating, but to some extent, maybe there is a difference. But I think a lot of people do think about dating. Okay, you go on dates. Like that's literally the word, right?
Yeah. I think dates. In my mind, dates almost are more important when you're actually married to that person, or
that's a take.
Yeah. I think, because here's the thing, dates. I think it's good to go on dates, and you need to do that some when you're dating. But ultimately, the goal of dating is to know whether you want to spend the rest of your life with that person in a marriage relationship.
So we're getting to that definition.
Yeah,
sure.
we are a little bit. And I think that dates can be helpful for that. But I think a lot of the time you can do that without going on dates. Just spending time together. Spending time together is not the same thing as going on a date, in my mind. And you can spend a lot of time together, not on dates. And I think might be a little bit more useful in some instances to spend time together not on dates than on dates, because a lot of the time on dates you're doing an activity together, which is good. That's a good way to get to know a person. It can be fun, and I'm sure hopefully you both have a good time doing whatever that is with the other person. But I think there's a lot of time that you can spend with that person that's not on dates, and in my mind, that's almost more valuable than going on lots of dates. I want to use like an example of. I'm not going to go into the whole courtship versus dating here.
We might do a whole episode. I'd be happy to do one.
But that is a part of the difference, I would say, is that with the kind of difference between the courtship versus dating thing is that you're not, when you're in the courtship system, at least from my knowledge, I'm not an expert on the courtship.
You're the dating expert,
I'm
not the courtship expert.
But
we'd have to bring somebody else on.
I'm familiar with it.
Yeah.
We might need to have a courtship
courting
expert on.
I don't know if that exists,
for like
sure.
Someone out there must call themselves that. But we might have to do that. But I think that's kind of the part of the difference is that you're spending more time. You're still spending time together, but it's either in more public scenarios with other people you both know, or in each other, like with each other's families and in each other's homes, or just not necessarily going by yourself together on dates.
Right.
And I think you can definitely still get to know that person just as well, doing that as you can. Going on dates.
So are you thinking, maybe you said it there at the end, but are you thinking like group settings particularly? Because that's obviously a big thing. I don't know particularly in courtship, but I think a lot of, like for young people, maybe in more, I don't want to say more Baptist-y circles, but, this idea of like, just get to know each other as a group, in a group. Is that kind of what you're pointing at here?
Yeah, I think that can be useful. Of course, that only goes to a certain extent because I think with your friend group, it's a little more awkward. There might be more like problems that can cause if you.
Sure.
I think it is good to spend time away, especially from your like friend group. I think that can be a little more distracting. And when you're with your friends, you don't want to like spend all your time. No one really likes the people who like when they're with all their friends, they spend all their time just talking to each other.
Yep.
Like that's just it's like
and
both people are depriving themselves of spending time with their friends, and no one really likes that.
Yeah.
But I do think there's a lot of time that you can spend with someone that's not going on dates that might be more valuable than just going on lots of dates. Not that I think going on dates is bad, but about my point earlier about it being more valuable later on, I think it serves a more clear purpose later on. That being to get time away, especially like from your kids and family, to get time away to do something fun together, which I think
to strengthen a relationship rather than
to strengthen your relationship rather than just to figure out whether you need to be in one. I think it might be a little bit better at strengthening that kind of relationship and having fun together, spending time away from other people together, which you might not get to as much. When you're older. So I think it might almost be more valuable then. Not to say it's useless when you're dating. I definitely think going on dates is fine and good in lots of circumstances. But I think there's some, there's some things to be said about it.
Yeah, there's so much there. But I want to kind of reel it back to this definition idea.
Yeah.
And just one more thing that I wanted to draw attention to. I know probably it's long past in some people's memories. You've said so much that is really interesting there, and I'd like to get to. But in that Wikipedia definition, one thing that I noticed reading it is, of course, they throw in which two individuals engage in activity. They're really trying to keep the door open, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yes. You can... It's true that two individuals date, not three. They got that at least.
Yeah, they did get the number correct.
They got the number correct. But specifically when a man and a woman go on the date, go on an activity together, not just any activity with anybody. So I think that's an important thing to bring up.
Exactly, for sure. I want to go towards my last year Word document definition.
Okay.
Because I think it kind of it's similar to yours, but I use very interesting terminology.
Okay.
So we'll see. I say dating is a particular friendship between a man and a woman in which through one-on-one interactions and group interactions, the two seek to find if they might be compatible for marriage.
Well, it's not wrong. I'll give you that. You should be friends with the person you're dating. I think that is true. Now, I do think I do think this brings up a very interesting and very hard to answer point, which is, what place does romance have in dating? Because I think your definition there is kind of, I don't know. Now, I don't know exactly why you wrote it this way.
I don't either, to be completely honest.
But in my mind, I think that you may have stated it as a friendship, kind of implying that maybe it's not really. It's more just a friendship than it is a romantic relationship. Dating is.
Yeah.
I think that might be what that's kind of saying.
I think so. Yeah.
And I don't completely disagree in the sense that I think romance is overrated in dating. I'll give you that. So
what does that mean? What does that even mean, Luke?
The goal of dating is not romance. The goal of dating is not romance. It's not to feel good or to have fun times or to, it's not to evoke specific feelings necessarily. Now, I think those feelings should be present before you marry someone. I don't think you should marry someone with no romantic feeling for them at all. I think those feelings were given to us for a specific reason. Yeah. And I think them not being present is a problem in a relationship, and that relationship is probably not going to go very
especially
smoothly.
In our culture.
Especially in the way we've been brought up. From years past, arranged marriages was the norm in lots of circumstances.
For better or for worse.
For better or for worse. We're not going to... Different episode.
Arranged marriage episode?
But for better or for worse. And I think people in general didn't expect, a large romantic attraction to the person they were going to marry. Right. So they were able to realize, okay, that's something that can grow over time, but is not... They didn't expect that to be there before. But we've been brought up, and we probably couldn't function very well if that wasn't there in the modern era.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think that feeling is necessary, but I don't think it's the goal of dating.
Right.
I think the goal of dating is to figure out if you really are compatible for long-term relationship and marriage. And I think that feeling should be there, but I don't think getting that feeling is the goal per se.
Now, that's interesting, because does that mean? I think there's a few different directions I want to go here, but I think it's an interesting idea. I think in our culture, I'm not even talking broadly, but directly in our culture, I think dating is generally considered a reaction to a romantic feeling.
Yes. And
I don't know if I don't have any thought about what do you think about that?
So here's what I'll say. I think what I'm trying to say is mainly that that feeling isn't necessary before you start dating. I think before you marry that person, that feeling should be present. But when you start dating someone, that shouldn't be a prerequisite for whether you date them or not, whether you already have.
Which is a crazy take, by the way. And I'm not calling you crazy, but in our culture, that's an insane thing to say. Yeah. Date someone who you're not romantically interested in is kind of a wild thing to say.
Yeah, and I think it depends what you mean by romantically interested.
For sure.
Because there's levels of being romantic. There's you're completely uninterested in a person and you would never consider yourself ever dating them. And then there's a kind of state where you're not right now you're not romantically attracted to them, but you could be. You don't know that it's not like you've made up your mind that you're not going to be. Yeah. So I think that's kind of the difference is that you don't know for sure. So our culture, especially in the media, portrays it as you fall in love, then you start dating.
Right.
Which either means, for some people that means they need to do, they might interpret that as they're physically attracted to them, therefore I've fallen in love, therefore I need to start dating them. Or some other sort of notion like that, or just being overly romantic or anything like that.
Just an emotional feeling.
Yeah, just an emotional feeling, which I think the emotional feeling needs to be there, be there for you to want to marry that person, but it doesn't need to start out being there.
Yeah. And I think we mentioned that in last episode where we were talking about go out on a date with anyone, which is kind of an insane thing to say as well.
Yeah.
But I liked it because I have talked to plenty of guys who will say, so I'm interested in this girl, or she's interested in me, or whatever it is. And they'll just start listing off how great she is. She's a great person. She's I think she's really beautiful. But I just don't know if I have the feeling, so I'm just being unsure. And And I just tell them, like, you just need to go after it. Like, if all of the things are stacked up like that, then you're not going into a marriage relationship.
Yes.
You're just dating this person.
Yes.
You need to just be the man and step up.
And if you never have any of those feelings, and if it doesn't work out, then it doesn't work out.
Exactly.
But I think that I think that's a good way of looking at it. And I think you also have to be careful because remember we were talking about earlier how those emotions need to be there, but they aren't the goal.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think you can fall into the opposite trap of trying to make yourself have those emotions or convincing yourself that you do.
Yep.
Which I think is also not good. You don't want to convince yourself that you are in love with this person just because you think it'd be a good idea to be in love with them. Or it logically makes sense that you would be.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. But I don't know that that's a lot of people's problems.
Yeah,
although maybe it is. I don't know. I could be
I don't
wrong.
know that's a lot of
I could have a
people's
small
problems.
sample size.
Yeah. That's just you don't want to do that either, is what I'm saying. You don't want to go to the opposite extreme of
for sure
of saying I'm dating so I have to grow these emotions, I'm going to have to feel them. You don't want to do that.
Yeah. I think something I'm going to get into right now that I wanted to talk about in this episode is the idea of so in this definition that I wrote a year and a half ago, I write a particular friendship, and you mentioned that, and it's like I think it's interesting that the Bible, if we're talking about biblical dating, the Bible doesn't have a category for dating at all. And so I think whether or not I intended it at the moment, now I kind of intend like, okay, friendship, not that I necessarily completely agree with this definition, but friendship is like a biblical category. Marriage is a biblical category. Dating is not a biblical category. And so is dating quote unquote biblical? And what does that even mean? Those are kind of my questions.
Yeah,
I think
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, dating isn't biblical in the sense that the word dating isn't in the Bible.
Right.
That doesn't mean it's not biblical. That doesn't mean that it's against the Bible. I don't think dating is against the Bible because I think that there is some extent that the reason the Bible doesn't mention dating is because people back then didn't understand what dating was.
Yeah.
Like, relationships and, like, marriage was viewed very differently. It was a lot more transactional in nature. You would marry for a reason, usually not just because you wanted to have children and so you were looking for someone to marry, you're looking for someone to marry, or because you could get something politically or monetary out of it.
Right. And our culture looks down on that like very majorly. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Do you look down on those reasons to marry?
I think a lot of them were bad. I think a lot of them were bad in the sense that there was lots of I don't think you should sell off your daughter to someone just to get money for it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah, for sure.
So I think a lot of the reasons those things happened were bad. I don't know that all of them were, and I'm not a history expert. I don't know exactly how all this worked or what, say, in different eras of history the daughters would or wouldn't have. So I think overall there was a reaction. Especially there was a reaction to that way that the world the Western world at least viewed relationships or
Right.
viewed marriage, and it's gone in a very different direction,
Yeah.
an opposite direction.
Yeah.
I think we're past. I don't know. We're past the at least recent peak of that.
Yeah.
As far as a culture,
That's a good point. Yeah.
I think
you're right.
I think our generation has somewhat realized that, okay, maybe all of these things, all of these kind of romantic ideas about relationships and about all these so even to some extent, a lot of these things we've been taught that our parents believed,
Mm-hmm.
or were taught through all these Disney, the classic like 90s Disney movie where they're like follow your heart and all that all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I
Let's
feel
hope.
like,
Let's hope our culture is
Yes.
getting a little disillusioned.
yes, I think
And I think so.
I think they are somewhat disillusioned by that. But they're still very much in the train of
right.
they're
But
still
to
very
reel it
much
back
influenced
in,
by that.
because we were talking about the biblicalness of dating, right?
Yeah.
So it's not a category, and it's not
Yeah.
in the Bible. So then, is it biblical?
I think
No, I shouldn't say that. Is it good? Is it good? Maybe I should say that.
it's good to make sure you are marrying a good the correct person, if that makes sense, or a
Yeah.
correct. I don't think there's one person out there for everyone.
Ooh,
So
another episode, maybe.
that
The
might be a
special
point
person.
I don't think there's like one person destined.
Right.
You're destined
I
to
agree.
be with outside of God's providence, like where you're destined to drop the spoon this morning and drop on the floor. And any more than you're destined to do anything in your life, I don't think you're destined to marry one person outside of that.
Mm-hmm.
So
So dating is good in the sense that it leads to choosing the right person to marry,
Yes.
which is valuable.
yes, which is good. So which is part of the definition of dating, which is dating should have a specific goal. Dating is not an end in and of itself, which I think is part of, if dating was an end in and of itself, there would be some allusion to it in the Bible, I think.
Right.
If dating was something,
Some sort of like,
some valuable part of the, like, very important, valuable part of a relationship and of marriage, then the Bible would say something about it if it was an actual vital part outside of just finding the right person
right.
to marry.
Right. Well, we're going to get to Cheto's definition and maybe like a final like Frankenstein of like the best of all three of those from you. But we're zooming. We're taking so much time. So we're already at our halfway point. And we're onto our new segment, Is It a Date? Let's see how successful this segment is. This is something I baked up just in the last week. The idea is that I'm going to lay out a scenario. I'm going to say like a sentence. We'll talk about it, and we're going to say, is that a date?
Yeah.
And then we'll add another layer, another layer, add another layer, until eventually you go, yeah, that's a date.
Okay.
Okay? Yeah, so we'll get into it. Okay, so it starts with a guy and a girl go to church. Is that a date?
Good. Separately, not in the same car.
It's just a guy and a
just
girl
are
go to
both
church.
at church.
Right.
That is not a date.
That's not a
I'm
date.
sorry. If you think if you think you're on a date and you go to church and you see another girl at church and she's also at church and you think you're on a date and you go up and you walk up to her and say, "Hey, how are you enjoying our date?" I think you have a problem. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You can't think.
Well,
that's a
I've
date.
been on many dates at church.
Yeah,
clearly,
every
I'm
week
sure.
I'm at many girls I go to church. Many girls I go on dates with every week. I mean, I said I've been on many dates.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. When
that's
I've
what
been
you
on
meant.
many dates.
Oh man. Okay, a guy and a girl go to church together and sit in the same row. Is it a date?
Okay, that is not a date.
Or pew? Pews are smaller.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that is not a date.
Okay.
I'm sorry to burst anyone who thought that was a date's bubble again, but I mean, you need to have some common sense here.
Okay, and I'm gonna bleep this out, but this next one is for Caroline. Okay, a guy invites a girl to church. They go to church. They sit in the same row. Is it a date?
A guy invites a girl.
A guy invites a girl to church. They both go to church. They sit in the same row. Row/pew. Not necessarily next to each other, nothing like that. Is it a date?
Probably not. Unless, I mean, you could make it, you could say, we're going on a date to church, and she'd be like, okay, we're going on a date, I guess. But unless you, like, unless you like made it clear, yeah, this is a church date or something. That's not a date, bro.
Right.
I mean, you
can just invite people to church.
You can invite people to church and it clearly not be dating.
Okay. Just hear that. Yeah.
Okay,
no.
please.
Yeah, literally. No, I think I'm gonna. Well, I'll do it in post. Okay, so a guy and girl go to church. They sit in the same row. The guy asks the girl to church, and the guy and girl sit next to each other at church. Is it a date?
I mean, not necessarily. It could be, but especially if the girl doesn't really know very many people there aside from you, like that might just be a polite thing to do.
Right.
It's not a date, especially if you didn't say anything about it. It's not a date. Like you could say maybe. I mean, even if you have some interest in her, that's not a date. You're just sitting next to her because you want to.
Right. Okay. All of the above, and the guy drives her to church. Picks her up, drives her to church. He asks her to church. He sits next to her. Is it a date?
It's a little sus, but it's not a date yet.
It's probably not a date.
It's not a date.
It could be a date.
It could be. You could make it a date like the other ones if you talk about it beforehand. But maybe if she doesn't have a good way to get to church.
It is what it is.
It is,
Yeah.
It's a little weird. It's a little much maybe, but especially if she's not a Christian,
yeah.
Then again, maybe you shouldn't be doing all that if she's not a Christian.
But maybe you're just trying to witness.
Maybe you're just trying to get her to go to church.
Exactly.
Get her to go to church. Maybe for some reason she can't get there for herself. Whatever. So you drive her. That's fine.
Yeah. Okay. All of the above, and the sermon is on Song of Solomon.
So if you brought her there specifically because the sermon was on Song of Solomon, then you're getting into some weird territory. Okay. Why are you doing that? That's a little much for even just dating. Even when you might want to sit apart from each other, even if you're already dating.
Song of Solomon week.
Song of Solomon week.
Let's take a break from sitting next to each other on this
one. but it's not necessarily a date. If you didn't know,
right? If you didn't know,
it's no different than any other one. That just happened to be the case.
Okay, all of the above, and it's also marriage conference weekend. It's the weekend where it's a marriage conference.
Oh, why are you doing that, bro? What are you doing? What are you trying to? I'm not sure it's a date because unless so hypothetically. Let's say you're at the marriage conference and there's a singles section at the marriage conference.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, you need to bring a date to church for this.
But that's a date. But if you're bringing her as a date,
if you're bringing her as a date, it's a date. But if there's no specified reason to bring her as a date, there's lots of circumstances in which that wouldn't be a date.
Okay.
But
a lot of circumstances in which you invite a girl, bring her, this sermon's on Song of Solomon, you sit next to her, and it's marriage conference week, and it's not a date. There's a lot of circumstances.
It's not 100% a date. You could just trying to, not make her feel lonely by sitting by herself
at the marriage conference. It's a little awkward.
It's awkward, but it's not necessarily a date. But it's getting very borderline to where, why are you doing that, bro?
Yeah.
What do you do? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to do?
Okay, and they hold hands while everyone's eyes are closed during the prayer.
Okay, you're not.
Is it a date?
Either you're on a date or you're being really weird. There's no that's hard. There's no reason to hold a girl's hand while you're praying.
While everyone's eyes is closed.
While everyone's eyes are closed.
Except me in this scenario.
Unless you're both interested in each other. And if you're both interested in each other and sitting next to each other and going to a marriage conference where the sermon is on Song of Solomon, then that is a date.
Okay, it's a date. It's a date. There you go. So that's the real deal breaker right there. Don't hold hands during the prayer.
You're just deceiving yourselves if you don't think maybe some people would say, well, going to church, it's never going to be a date. But if you assume that there's a circumstance where you both go to church together and that's a date, then that's pretty much as close as you can get outside of other scandalous activities.
Well, you got pretty far down, probably a little further than I thought. There was only 2 more ranks above that. We had, and he goes for put the arm around her during the sermon.
Yeah, that's definitely also a date.
Yeah, probably a date.
That's a little. Everyone's looking at that point. They're
Yeah.
like, who is this girl this guy's bringing to church? They're dating.
Exactly. And then the last one was if they hold hands during not the prayer, like when people aren't even praying.
Everyone assumes you're dating.
Yeah.
If everyone assumes you're on a date and dating, then you pretty much are.
Yeah. Okay. Let's jump back into our dating definition, and we're probably coming near the end of our time already because this has been a brick of an episode. But
yeah, lots of stuff to cover.
But I don't remember exactly where we were, but I think we should just pick up with Checho's definition of dating, the third one. And this one's actually very broad.
Yeah.
So I don't want to push this on him. It was in the heat of the moment.
Yeah.
But he's essentially suggested it's when, what I have here, his exact quote is spending time together after acknowledged romantic interest from both parties. And because it's Checho, we can presume he's talking about a man and a woman. He's not trying to open the door or anything.
Yes.
So spending time together after acknowledged romantic interest. That is dating. What do you think about that definition?
I mean, I listened to the episode, and he also specified separately, I'm pretty sure. You kind of asked him, what do you think about you date to marry? Or he brought it up himself or something.
Mm-hmm.
And what he said, I'm pretty sure, was you don't date to marry, you date to figure out if you're going to marry someone.
Mm-hmm.
So we can kind of add that on to kind of what he said.
And I really like what he said there as well.
Yeah. Now, you could make the argument that there's probably not really a difference between dating to marry and dating to figure out whether you're going to marry someone.
Yeah.
I think he might have just misunderstood what date to marry means, because I think that is what date to marry means, meaning you date with the end goal of marrying.
Mm-hmm.
Not meaning that you date already decided that you're going to marry that person,
right.
Meaning you date with the end goal being, if this goes well, we're going to marry each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that you can add that onto his definition, and I think his definition does a pretty good job of covering what we've discussed in the sense that it doesn't necessitate lots of dates.
Yep. It doesn't bring into friendship things.
No. Yeah. I think that those words can be a little confusing. So I think his definition, maybe an updated definition of his would be. What was his? I can't remember.
So he said spending time together after dating is. Let me reorganize it in a way that makes sense. Dating is a relationship between a man and a woman when they spend time together after acknowledged romantic interest.
You could adding on to that with the goal of deciding whether they want to marry each other. I think that is essentially my definition of dating. I think that covers most bases. Now, with so many things involved in dating, it's hard to make a very succinct definition that covers everything. But I think that's a good one to work on. It doesn't necessitate a certain view on how it's done. It doesn't necessitate lots of dates or not very many dates. It allows some flexibility that I think is reasonable flexibility while still providing a good skeleton of what dating is.
Yeah. I will say, though, I'll pick you a little bit because in this definition, it talks about after acknowledged romantic interest. And we were talking about before, is acknowledged romantic interest a prerequisite of dating?
Yeah, so I think,
and maybe we're just rehashing what we already said, but
I think that's an interesting point because, on one hand, you could say that it's not, but you could also say that just because you go on a date, does that mean you're dating?
I don't think it is, and I think we covered that to some extent.
So I think you can go on a date with someone when you don't have romantic interest.
Right.
You can go maybe on a couple. And you're probably dating once you go on multiple dates, I would say, or a few dates.
Maybe.
If you go on a few dates, I would say you're probably dating, but not necessarily, because it might just be that you don't have very many ways to hang out together outside of that. So maybe you need to go do something or spend time together specifically to figure out who that person is more. I think from Checho's perspective, it makes sense why he would say from that because his dating experience, it makes sense that he he already knows the only person he's really had any serious relationship with. He knew her for a long time.
Right.
So it wasn't like he needed to figure out who she was as a person before.
Yeah.
So,
and it's interesting. In our culture, we have the idea of like, okay, going on dates versus being boyfriend and girlfriend. That is a differential even in our like culture at large.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair difference.
Yeah.
So I think you can go on dates without having romantic interest, and to a certain extent you can be dating, but I think that interest should be developing during.
Yeah, and I mean,
time.
if we're using this biblical ideas about pursuing a marriage that is good,
yes,
then maybe we could say like the difference there is when you're just going on dates,
mm-hmm.
you're trying to find the right person to marry, and so you're going on dates to continue to look for that. And then when you're dating someone, you're specifically saying, I'm interested in finding out if you would be the right person to marry. Like, it's a specific relationship rather than just, when you're going on dates, it's maybe a little bit more of a broad.
Yeah, you're just getting to know, especially if you don't already know that person, you're just getting to know them.
Right.
You're just doing the basic things you do, maybe not as quickly or as succinctly, but you do to some extent if you were just friends.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah.
You're talking about those same kinds of things you would be either way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there's some points to be had about Checho's definition as far as both having romantic interest, but I don't think it's necessary that both have. Of course, you have to define romantic interest.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you can start dating when you're not madly in love with each other. That's what
right.
I think there should be, when you've committed to like an actual dating relationship where you're going to spend some time, you're going to spend some time. Like, I think once you've committed to that, you're just committed to spending some time to figure it out, even if it's not always smooth.
Right. So it's almost like, I've gotten to know you, and I've decided that I'm interested in finding out if you are the right person for me to marry, and that's romantic interest. The quote unquote romantic interest is I'm interested in specifically finding out if you are the right person for me to marry.
That doesn't mean you're madly in love with
right.
them. You're like that isn't necessary all the time.
Yeah, I'm really happy with that. I think that makes a lot of sense.
I think that's good.
We're going to have to push Sunday school snippets to a future episode.
Sad.
As well as just that whole courting idea and spending time. Checho's definition includes spending time together, but that's not necessarily date. Is it group? We talked about that a little bit.
Yeah.
But is that family time? We'll have to talk about that in one of the episodes.
Yes.
But I think it's about time to go to the Bible verse of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And because we're doing Dating 101, I'm going to do what I think is kind of the Dating 101 Bible verse, okay? So this is 2 Corinthians 6:14, English Standard Version. Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. That's all I need to be said. That's the beginning of the verse. But do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. What does this have to say about dating? Luke, the dating expert.
Yeah, I think first and foremost it means don't marry non-Christians. So you don't marry a person who is not a Christian. That's basic. That's the basis of it.
And we've been kind of presuming that over these two episodes, but just if you are a believer, don't marry someone who's an unbeliever.
Yeah. You see many examples in the Bible. You think of Solomon, how he had all these wives with different gods. That corrupted him. That made him give in to what they wanted. Aside from the fact he had many wives, which is another problem. But even one wife who's not a Christian, who worshipped these other gods, could have done the same thing to him. Could have influenced him. Maybe even more so because he might have loved that one wife in a better, more actual way than he could all his other wives, who he probably was just wanting to not be angry all the time. I'm not sure how much you can actually love that many wives correctly.
Right. Probably not.
Probably not. He's probably just like, they keep annoying me so much. I gotta do something to appease them with their gods. Which is not a
But unbeliever. The point stands.
Yeah, but unbeliever, it's gonna cause there's a very high chance it'll cause you to sin or weaken your faith or make you abandon your faith altogether. But I think unequally yoked also means, to a certain extent, with someone who is not in the same position in their faith as you.
So don't marry someone who's not in the same position in their faith.
Or like greatly difference. So not to say that you should never date them necessarily or get to know them or view them as someone who you can marry. You could marry, but I think you don't want to be on the equally yoked in that sense either.
What's an example of that?
Like for example, let's say just like a very new Christian who's new to the faith and still figuring things out. You might not want to commit to a full dating relationship.
And you're like, a long-time Christian,
really
very
mature in the faith. That doesn't mean you can't be friends or like go on a date or something. But committing to a more committed relationship in the sense that part of dating, I would say, is you say you at least acknowledge that you're gonna not just stop it with one problem comes up, but you're going to try and work through some things to figure out if you can actually work through these things in an actual relationship.
And essentially, like, if you're just like with our definition of dating, we can now say if you're not going to marry this person, then you shouldn't be dating this person, right?
Yes.
And so if you're going to say, okay, I shouldn't be marrying this person who's crazy difference in Christian maturity, then therefore I should not be dating them right now.
Because that's going to cause problems if they still have lots of. I mean, new Christians often have lots of bad habits that they still have from when they were a non-Christian. And those things can be worked through. That's why I'm not saying that you should never date them or go on dates or get to know them.
Right.
Because they can grow in their faith just like you can. They make it. It's not like they're. It's different than saying like than a non-Christian who you cannot marry.
Right.
That is unbiblical as against the Bible. It's not like you cannot marry a non-Christian, but it's why I would say it's wise to not get too emotionally attached to them, especially when they're a new Christian and you don't know, to put it bluntly, you don't know if their faith is real or not.
Right.
A lot of new Christians, there's a lot of, the Bible talks about the parable of the sower throwing seeds onto the dirt. And some of it sprouts up, and some of it, for a while, he throws it on the shallow soil, and then it gets down, and then it dies away. So, not to say you should assume they're not a Christian,
right?
But
be cautious dating a new believer.
Yeah, be cautious dating a new believer
because you don't want to date someone who's a non-believer because you don't want to marry someone who's a non-believer.
Yes, and if you get too emotionally attached to them, which emotional attachment is another topic we can discuss. If you get too emotionally attached to them, then it's going to be a lot harder and a lot more painful if they fall back into sin, if something like that happens. Then it's going to be a lot more painful for you to have to cut off that relationship, and will cause a lot more problems.
Right. And along those lines, I think also not unequally yoked in your calling in general terms.
Yeah.
If one of the, either the guy or the girl feels heavily called to foreign missions, and the other one says, I'm never leaving the United States.
That's a bad relationship.
Yeah.
You're not going to feasibly marry that person and not expect there to be major problems.
Right. But I think, and maybe we'll have to draw this distinction someday, is the difference between, or some episode, the difference between what excludes getting into a dating relationship and then what would break one up. I think that's something that could break up your dating relationship. Yes. But if they're like, if they just went to like a missions conference and decided they wanted to be a missionary, and you're like, I don't really know if I do want to be a missionary.
Yeah, that's not.
You can probably still start dating, and maybe you'll figure out that you can come to the middle.
You can figure that out, and if it's just like a first thought, an idea, then you can. There's a good chance you can work through that.
Yeah.
And at that point, unless you feel that person feels majorly called to do that, in which point I think if you've been with that person long enough. In most cases, you might, let's say, for example, if you're already married and then let's say your spouse comes to that conviction, I think a lot of the times you might be more willing to change your opinion on that as well. Right. Whereas when you're in that kind of dating relationship, you're getting closer and closer together, and one of you has a strong conviction and one of you has a different strong conviction, you're going to be less likely to be able to work that out at that point.
And then you do have to work that out.
Yeah,
because
you have to work that out.
Maybe one of you is willing to change. But if you really aren't both willing to change, then that might be Don't be
a reason to not-
unequally yoked.
Yes.
Don't go forward with that marriage.
And I think another thing also involved in this is theology. If you have radically different theology that affects actual areas of your life that is going to cause disputes, unless one of you is willing to compromise to some extent, not just because saying, oh yeah, okay, I'll go along, but actually work through it and be convinced of something different. I think there's some levels of theology differences that also are a part of this that you have to consider. Yeah,
for sure. Well, I think that's good. I think we've covered the basics.
Yep.
That definition of dating definitely took longer than I thought, but I think it was a good thing. I think we really pounded that out.
Yeah.
And we'll definitely refer back to that throughout the series. If you're listening later in the series, you're like, well, why are they talking in this way? Well, it's probably because we started with this definition.
Yes. I think the feedback we got from our first episode showed that we really needed to pound in a foundation that we can build off of.
Exactly, for sure. Well, thank you all for listening to Date Her or Excommunicator. Please reach out on our Instagram at DHEH Podcast, I believe. It'll be linked if that's not quite right. And then also at Gmail, it's dhehpodcast@gmail.com. Again, I believe that's correct. It'll be linked for you guys. Just reach out.
Yeah. Also, coming soon, Discord coming soon. I'm not sure exactly when that will be, but we're gonna have I'm gonna have a Discord server up and running. You can chat about the episodes, chat with your fellow fans, send in questions, send in maybe some segment suggestions. That'd be fun.
Yeah, for sure.
We could do some different episodes with listener-generated ideas and stuff like that.
For sure.
Would be fun.
Yep. Well, thank you guys all for listening, and we'll be back next week.
Goodbye.